We did some research a year ago about teacher education across the country. I'm sure most of you will have seen that, and particularly found that where there's really strong leadership support for professional development, trainees, teachers, teaching assistants always tell us that they feel really supported and spirited by that level of engagement with the CPD programmes. So what does this mean for inspection? So the first part of the presentation is to really look at professional development in Common Inspection Framework and also in the new handbook. So when Sean Harford, who I'm sure some of you have tweeted with, met with, heard speak before, talked about us developing a new Common Inspection Framework last year, we really wanted to look carefully at how we inspect and report on professional development right through the school. So I want to pull out some big key messages. The first thing is the emphasis on the training for your trainees and especially for those newly qualified teachers. And we have said in the handbook that inspectors must report on the support and the impact of that support for NQTs, but also for those teachers that join the profession and are with us in the very early stages, so even after the NQT year, first year, second year in teaching. Obviously to deal with the core skills, behaviour, classroom management, but above and beyond that, generic and subject pedagogy, and I know that you've been doing quite a lot of work on that in the sessions this morning. And developing confidence of NQTs so that they feel really skilled in whatever situation they find themselves in, so they can raise their confidence and the pupils can feel confident in that teaching. Also, we talked about in the new framework the quality of mentoring. Well, what does that really mean? Mentoring, coaching. There's so much research out there. But being a mentor is more than being a really great practitioner. So how do you share the craft of teaching with newly qualified teachers, teachers really early on in their career? So you might be a fantastic practitioner, but how do you distill that knowledge and then coach and guide some newly qualified teachers? So the other key areas, particularly for looking and inspecting professional development, is rooted in the leadership and management of professional development. So I want to raise a few questions here from these two bullets in the handbook. How do you, in your school, ensure that your staff are motivated and respected to deliver effective teaching? What is it that motivates your staff to engage in professional development? Because we find, and I know that you've found this in your research, that professional development isn't just about remedying weaknesses. It's about a professional experience. It's about developing and owning their practice rooted in evidence. Certainly we're finding that. That's something that we're looking for when we're out on inspection, when we're looking at this particular area and talking to you about what you're doing in your schools. We also, in writing the new framework, wanted to highlight the role that governors play here. So how in your schools do you get the governors to buy into your vision for, your planning for, your evaluation of the impact of professional development? And what about professional development for your governors? How are they involved? Do you do any shared professional development with your teaching staff, your teaching assistants, and your governors? And particularly in leadership and management, how right across your school, from practitioners that are right at the start of the career, your middle leaders, right through to your senior leaders, how is professional development planned for them? And not just for performance management reasons, but to continue that professional dialogue from training right through into someone's career. The stages in our careers, I think, is really important. How bespoke is your professional development to the range of knowledge, expertise and skills of your staff? So how do you get teachers, leaders to take ownership of their own professional development. So on inspection, how do we gather evidence? So I'm sure on the receiving end of our inspections, you've all been party to this, particularly discussions with staff and leaders. And David and I were talking when I arrived about how I hope you feel, I certainly feel, that we're being more transparent on inspection. We listen to you. We are trying to make sure that the engagement with leaders on inspection, not just through teaching in classrooms, but through sharing meetings and really wanting to understand what it is that you're evaluating as impacting your schools. And I think that discussion about pedagogy and deepening subject knowledge and skills and how you do that really has to shape some of those discussions with a whole range of leaders right across your schools. And by staff, I think it's important, and I mentioned it earlier, we really do need to include your teaching support assistants. What's the development like for those colleagues in your school? Clearly, we're interested in your own staff surveys and also just listening and gathering views from a range of staff that we talk to during inspection. Meetings with your governors, that's a really good way to understand what you're planning, how it ties into your vision for professional development, but also for really developing great teaching at your schools. And watching teaching and learning, whether it's 20 minutes, half an hour, or short extracts. We've said recently, Sean said it in his blog, that's exactly what those observations are. But the layers around that, about how you tell us what you're doing in planning, in development work, feed into that bigger picture there about us looking at teaching and learning and, of course, assessment across your schools. It's interesting on inspection, if there is a professional development session going on during a one-day, two-day inspection. Certainly my work on ITE inspections, I sit in and I watch a lot of those sessions. And there's a great opportunity. So if you do have inspectors in your school and are those kinds of activities going on, please do invite us, because that's a way of us also looking and seeing what's going on in your school with your staff. We're not looking for any single model of professional development. Really important, though, that we get underneath the impact, the evaluation of impact on your pupils and your staff and on whole school improvement. Again, there's no right way to do that. It's your evaluation, whatever methodology you may use. But how do you signpost us to that on inspection? And are you looking at the long-term impact as well as some of the short-term impact for improving outcomes for your young people in your schools? And one size doesn't fit all, absolutely. And so how you develop, revise, change your practice in your schools, if something's not working and you've evaluated it, it didn't work, then tell us about that. Show us what you did instead and how you're working across the school to shape better practice. In schools, I would really hope that we've moved away from this notion of a threat of Ofsted. We need to do this in professional development because it's what Ofsted want. Well, actually, we need you to do what's right for you, your staff, and your pupils and your school. But alongside that autonomy, inevitably, is the balance of accountability. So sharing with us through really robust discussion. Sometimes that can feel really challenging, and that's part of inspection. The challenge is to understand, the challenge is to really judge and work with you to evaluate the impact. But also, you challenged us about consistency and greater clarity needed on inspection. So part of the Mythbuster work has been to try and drive that agenda forwards, but also for you, but also for us. And that was a really big step last year in bringing in-house our Ofsted inspectors. I don't know whether there's any in the room today. And that's been a really good journey this year in working with the training team, the regional directors, the senior HMI and the link HMI to really get those messages very much embedded in our Ofsted training. So part of our Mythbuster work has really been to tackle that myth about doing extra work just because it's Ofsted. Let's have a look at a couple. Assessment does not expect to see particular ways of you tracking your pupil progress, not requesting pages and pages of Excel spreadsheets or MI information or data information. It's your data, it's your analysis of whatever structures and systems you use for assessing progress, subject specific, etc., as well as published data, your own internal data and your current progress data. But is it accurate? And how do you know it's accurate? So as part of your professional development, what do you do to enable your staff, therefore, to tell us and talk to us about what you do right across the curriculum, not just in literacy and numeracy, English and maths, but what about in PE? What about in music? What about in the sciences and the languages? How do you develop that confidence in using different ways of assessment? Marking and feedback. Lots and lots and lots and lots of marking. With what impact? So that myth that Ofsted wants to see everything written down in a student's book. Triple marking, red pen, green pen, pink pen, black pen, blue pen. What does that really mean? And we recognise, of course we do, there are situations, clearly, where written feedback and oral feedback go hand in hand, absolutely. If I'm teaching a class in a performance studio, I'm not going to stop the activity and get the students necessarily to write everything down at that moment in time. They hear the oral feedback. But the quality of that is the key. So on inspection, the readability for pupils, when I talk to pupils and try to understand their knowledge of the feedback, what do they understand by the feedback? Can they read it? Do they say to me, well, miss, I'm not quite sure what I've got to do to improve because I can't read it? And how do you know? And lesson planning. Moving away and breaking down that myth that we want to see individual lesson plans, we want to see historic lesson plans, we want to see lever arch folders of schemes of work, programs of study, etc., etc., etc. The list can be endless. It's up to you. What are you doing in your planning in school? Share it with us. Tell us how you're planning for different pupil groups, for different subjects, whole curriculum plans, whatever they may be. But the most important thing, clearly, is the effectiveness. That's where on inspection, when we talk to you as groups of teachers, groups of staff, it's really enlightening when we can have that robust debate with you about what are you doing and what did you change? How have you developed your practice? And that's where we get that discussion that isn't just from an observation of teaching in a classroom, but about your work and your practice. Some big key messages here. Please, I hope today that you'll take away the clarification for schools document back into all of the work that you're doing right across your schools and use it also maybe alongside your Ofsted videos. They're short, they're quite digestible, I think, for some quick wins there with staff and governors. But also, now those 3 reports are out, the ones on screen, there's some really important messages in there that align with our Mythbuster work. And through those reports, ourselves at Ofsted, we will be held to account for actioning the priorities in the back of those key documents about how we'll be monitoring what we do, but also doing retrieval from reports, from our school inspection reports, to look at, are things changing? What does the evidence tell us against that new agenda, that changing agenda?